She wiped my satellite firmware and called it legacy junk. I rebuilt it for her father's biggest competitor in 9 days. No. Wait. That's not my story. But it could have been. Because the playbook is the same. Someone who's never built anything walks into a room full of people who have, and decides the builders are the problem. My name is Stuart Ames. I'm 50 years old. And until a 28-year-old with a Wharton MBA and his mother's last name cut my salary in half and called me replaceable, I was the only thing standing between Greystone Energy Corp. And a federal shutdown order. Let me back up. I spent 12 years in the United States Navy. Enlisted at 18 out of a high school in Tidewater, Virginia, where my options were the shipyard, the Navy, or the kind of slow decline that swallows towns whole. I chose the Navy, became a nuclear machinist's mate, which means I learned to operate, maintain, and babysit a pressurized water reactor aboard a warship traveling at 30 knots through the North Atlantic. My boat was the USS Theodore Roosevelt, CVN 71. I did 3 deployments. I stood watch in the engine room at 2 a.m. while 100,000 shaft horsepower turned seawater into wake. I learned that a reactor doesn't care about your feelings, your politics, or your MBA. It cares about physics, and physics doesn't negotiate. I left the Navy at 30 as a petty officer first class, E6. 12 years of service, every qualification the nuclear pipeline could stamp on my record, and a body that already ached in the mornings. I walked into Greystone Energy Corp's Oconee County facility in South Carolina on a Monday in April of 2005 and never left. 19 years. I'll say that again because people hear it and don't feel it. 19 years in the same building, walking the same corridors, drinking the same burnt coffee from the same stainless steel pot in the same break room that hasn't been painted since Clinton was president. 19 years of 4:45 a.m. alarms because the day shift for a nuclear plant starts before the sun does, and the reactor doesn't care that it's Saturday. 19 years of maintaining, calibrating, documenting, inspecting, and standing in front of NRC auditors with a straight back and a clear answer every single time they asked a question. I became a senior reactor operator, licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That license isn't a certificate you hang on the wall. It's a federal authorization that says this specific human being, with this specific training, at this specific facility, is qualified to direct the operation of a commercial nuclear reactor. You can't buy it. You can't inherit it. You can't get it with a consulting gig and a handshake. It takes 18 months of supervised training at the facility itself, followed by a written exam and an operating exam administered by NRC examiners, who've been doing this longer than most MBAs have been alive. I held the only active NRC senior reactor operator license at Greystone's facility, the only one. There had been 3 of us once: me, Carl Whitaker, and Dan Ellison. Carl retired in 2021. Dan retired in 2023. I told management both times. I filed formal memoranda. I sat in leadership meetings and said, in plain language, that we needed to begin the 18-month licensing pipeline for replacements immediately, or we'd be operating with a single point of failure. That single point of failure was me. They nodded. They took notes. They did nothing. The 2 reactors I managed generated $2.7 billion in annual electricity revenue across a 6-state grid. $2.7 billion. That number ran through my control room, my protocols, my license, and my relationship with the NRC's Region 2 office in Atlanta. I knew the senior resident inspector by name, Frank Calloway. We'd been through 9 triennial inspections together. Not a single significant finding in 19 years. You don't build that record with procedures alone. You build it by being the person who picks up the phone at 11 p.m. when Frank's office has a question, and having the answer before he finishes asking it. That was my life. 2 reactors, $2.7 billion, 6 states, and a relationship with the federal regulator that kept the lights on from Charlotte to Charleston. Here's what it cost me. My daughter Emma's 8th grade graduation. My son Ryan's first varsity baseball start at Oconee High. Meg drove him, sat in the bleachers alone, texted me the score. I read it in the control room during a refueling outage at 10 p.m. He struck out twice and got a single. I still know the count on the single. 3-1. Meg told me because she knows I'd want the details. She's always known that about me. Meg. Margaret Donovan. We've been married 23 years. She teaches 4th grade at Oconee Elementary. She's never once asked me why I missed dinner. She just wraps a plate in foil and sets it on the counter with a fork on top. Some nights I'd come home and the plate was cold, and the house was dark, and the fork was the only thing in the kitchen that looked like it was waiting for me. I missed Thanksgiving twice. Not because of an emergency, because of scheduled maintenance windows that couldn't move. I ate a turkey sandwich from the vending machine in the break room and called Meg at 7 p.m. I could hear Ryan and Emma arguing about pie in the background. She held the phone up so I could listen. I sat in a plastic chair next to a reactor containment wall and listened to my family have Thanksgiving without me. 19 years of that. Not because I was ambitious, not because I was chasing a title, because the reactor doesn't stop running because it's your kid's birthday. And somebody has to be there. For 19 years, that somebody was me. Then Trent Holloway showed up. 28 years old. Wharton MBA, class of 2022. Son of Margaret Holloway, CEO of Greystone Energy Corp. He'd spent 14 months at an energy sector consulting boutique called Ridgeline Partners, a 2-person shop in Philadelphia that lost its only client 6 months before Trent's mother created a position for him at Greystone. His title, Vice President of Operational Excellence. He arrived in a navy blazer with brass buttons, a Tag Heuer watch, and a pair of loafers that had never touched the non-skid grating of a reactor building floor. First week, he scheduled an operational alignment meeting in the executive conference room, the one with the glass table and the mounted flat screen that nobody ever uses because everything we actually discuss is either in the control room or in a secure document. He projected a slide deck, 42 slides. The title slide read, Greystone 3.0, Lean Operations for a Dynamic Energy Future. There was a stock photo of a wind turbine on it. We operate nuclear reactors. He talked for 90 minutes. He used the word streamline 14 times. I counted. He said the plant was overstaffed for its output profile. He said the maintenance teams were legacy-heavy. He said the safety protocols were conservative to the point of operational drag. I sat in the back row. I didn't say a word. After the meeting, he walked past me in the hallway. He looked at my badge, then at me, then at his phone. Donovan, right? He said, not looking up. You're the reactor guy? The reactor guy. I've held a federal license for 19 years, and he called me the reactor guy the way you'd call someone the copier guy. That's right, I said. Great. Let's get some time on the calendar. I want to understand the cost structure of your department. He said, your department, the way you'd say, your storage unit. 3 weeks later, he called me into a leadership meeting. 12 people in the room: the CFO, the COO, the VP of Generation, 3 plant managers, HR, and Trent, sitting at the head of the table like he'd earned the chair. His mother wasn't there. She never was. She governed from the Charlotte office, 3 hours away, and trusted her son's judgment the way only a mother can. He pulled up a single slide. It had my name on it, my title, and my salary, projected on the wall for everyone to see. "Wes," he said, smiling, "we're restructuring the senior technical roles to align with our new operational model. Effective next quarter, your position is being transitioned to advisory status. Your compensation will be adjusted to reflect the reduced scope." Adjusted. He meant cut in half. "The operational responsibilities currently under your title will be distributed across the plant management team," he continued. "This isn't a reflection of your contributions. It's about building a leaner, more agile leadership structure." He paused, looked around the table. Nobody spoke. "You're replaceable, Wes. Everyone in this room is. That's what a healthy organization looks like." The room was silent. I could hear the HVAC system cycling. I could hear Frank Mercer, the CFO, shift in his chair. I could hear the word hanging in the air like a gas leak nobody wanted to acknowledge. Replaceable. I looked at him for a long time. He held the eye contact for about 3 seconds, then glanced at his watch. I stood up. "Effective when?" I asked. "Next quarter, January 1st. "No," I said. "My resignation." "Effective when?" He blinked. "What?" "I'm resigning. Right now. Effective immediately." I reached into my shirt pocket, took out my pen, pulled a pad of paper from the table, and wrote 4 lines. My name, my title, today's date. Effective immediately. I signed it, slid it across the glass table, and walked out of the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I didn't say what would happen next. He'd find out. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed the way they always did. That particular frequency you stop hearing after a few years. The one that lives in the walls of every nuclear facility I've ever worked in. I walked past the control room entrance, past the break room with the stainless steel coffee pot, past the bulletin board with the safety metrics I'd kept green for 19 years. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I badged out at the security desk, handed my dosimeter to the health physics tech, a kid named Garrett who'd started 6 months ago, and looked at me like I'd just told him the building was on fire, and pushed through the double doors into the parking lot. Late November in Oconee County. 36 degrees. Clear sky, no wind. The kind of morning where every breath is visible and the parking lot looks like it's been polished. My truck was in the same spot it's been in for 19 years. 3rd row, near the light pole, driver's side facing the building. 2011 Chevy Silverado, dark blue, 198,000 miles. The seat knows the shape of me by now. I sat in that truck for 20 minutes, engine off, hands on the steering wheel. The dash clock read 10:47 a.m. Then I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's Region 2 office in Atlanta. I asked for Frank Calloway, the senior resident inspector I'd worked with for 15 years. Frank picked up on the second ring. "Frank, it's Wes Donovan at Greystone." "Wes, what's going on?" "I resigned this morning. Effective immediately. As of 10:32 a.m., Greystone Energy Corp. no longer employs a licensed senior reactor operator at the Oconee County facility." Silence. 3 full seconds. "Wes, you're telling me they have no licensed SRO on staff?" That's what I'm telling you. As of this morning. As of this morning. Another silence. Then quietly. Good Lord. I didn't need to explain what happened next. Frank knew the regulations better than anyone. 10 CFR 50.54 M. The federal requirement that a commercial nuclear reactor must have a licensed senior reactor operator present during operations. Without one, you're in violation. Without one, the NRC doesn't ask politely. They act. I'm filing the notification now, I said. You'll have it in writing within the hour. Wes, Frank paused. Are you okay? I'm fine, Frank. Just doing the paperwork right. You always do. I hung up. The second call was to Meg. She picked up during her planning period. I could hear the muffled sound of a school hallway behind her. Sneakers on linoleum, a locker slamming, a kid laughing. Hey, she said. You never call during the day. I resigned. Quiet. Not shocked quiet. Meg quiet. The kind of quiet that means she's reading my voice the way she reads everything, carefully, completely, without rushing. Okay, she said. Come home, I'll make lunch. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Wes? Yeah. You sound like yourself for the first time in about 2 years. I drove home. The route I'd driven 4,700 times. I did the math once. During a refueling outage when I had nothing else to occupy my hands, Route 130 to the state road, past the Dollar General, past the Citgo station where I've bought the same black coffee every morning since 2005, past the Baptist church with the marquee that always has a pun on it. Today it said, God has a plan. Trust the process. I almost smiled. At home, I ate a sandwich at the kitchen table. Turkey and Swiss on wheat. Meg sat across from me and graded spelling tests. Neither of us spoke for a while. That's the thing about 23 years. The silence isn't empty. It's just efficient. Then my phone rang. A 703 number. Northern Virginia. I didn't answer it, but I knew who it was. And I knew he'd call again. If you've ever had your life's work dismissed by someone who couldn't pass the entrance exam, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me tell you what Trent Holloway didn't know. 3 days before the leadership meeting, the one where he projected my salary on the wall and called me replaceable, Keith forwarded me an email chain. Keith Mercer, my assistant operations supervisor, a 14-year plant veteran who'd been in the control room almost as long as I had. He'd been CC'd on an internal thread by accident. The kind of accident that happens when someone hits reply all without checking the distribution list. The thread was between Trent, his mother Margaret, and an external consultant from Ridgeline Partners, the same 2-person shop Trent had worked at before Mommy created a job for him. The subject line was Phase 2 Staffing Realignment. The key passage from Trent. Donovan is a legacy operator. He's been doing the same job since before I was in high school. His value is sentimental, not strategic. We're paying him $340,000 a year to babysit equipment that runs itself. The reactors are automated. We don't need a full-time federal licensee sitting in a chair watching gauges. Cut his comp, move him to advisory, and reinvest the savings in the efficiency initiative. The reactors are automated. I read that line twice. The man was responsible for 2 commercial nuclear reactors, and he thought they ran themselves. Margaret's response, agreed, but handle it carefully. He's been there a long time, and people are loyal to him. Frame it as a structural change, not a demotion. And then, the line that told me everything. Trent's reply to his mother. He's 50 with a GED education and a niche federal license that's only good at this plant. Where's he going to go? Where's he going to go? He thought the license chained me to the building. He thought my age made me immobile. He thought the specialization that made me one of the most valuable nuclear professionals in the southeastern United States was actually a cage. He was wrong about everything. My senior reactor operator license is facility-specific. That part is true. It's valid for the Greystone Oconee County plant. But here's what Trent didn't understand, because Trent has never read a federal regulation in his life. The knowledge, training, and qualifications that underpin that license transfer anywhere. Any commercial nuclear operator in the country would hire me and put me through their facility-specific certification in a fraction of the normal timeline, because I've already done the hardest 90% of the work. The 18-month licensing process for a new SRO. For someone with my background at a facility that wants me, it compresses to under 6 months. And several companies had already told me as much. Because here's the other thing Trent didn't know. I'd been getting calls for years. Lakeshore Nuclear, a Dominion-affiliated operator running 2 reactors out of their Clarksville, Tennessee facility, had been trying to recruit me since 2019. Their VP of Generation, a man named Garrett Sullivan, had taken me to dinner twice. Once at an industry conference in Atlanta, once when he drove down to Oconee County specifically to make the pitch. Both times, I said the same thing. I appreciate it, Garrett, but I've got a commitment here. Loyalty. That was my cage, not the license, not my age. Loyalty to a building, a team, and a reactor I'd kept running for 19 years. Trent Holloway shattered that loyalty in a conference room at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning. And by 10:47, I was sitting in my truck making the phone call that would end Greystone Energy Corp. As a functioning utility. Here's what happened in the 72 hours after I walked out. Hour 1. I filed written notification with the NRC's region to office confirming that Greystone no longer employed a licensed senior reactor operator. The notification went to Frank Calloway directly, with a copy to the regional administrator. Hour 4. Frank Calloway called Douglas Prescott, Greystone's Director of Regulatory Compliance. Doug was a good man, 22 years at the plant, knew every inspection finding going back to 2002. He told me later that when Frank said the words SRO staffing deficiency, his hands went cold. Hour 6. The NRC initiated a special inspection under Inspection Procedure 93812. Reactive inspection for immediate safety concerns. 2 inspectors were dispatched from the region to office. Hour 14. Doug Prescott called Trent Holloway's office. Trent didn't answer. Doug called Margaret Holloway in Charlotte. She answered, "Margaret, we have a regulatory emergency. Wes Donovan resigned this morning, and we have no licensed senior reactor operator on site. The NRC is sending inspectors. We are in violation of 10 CFR 50.54M as of this morning." Margaret's response, according to Doug, "What do you mean he resigned? Trent said he was moving to advisory." "He resigned, Margaret. He walked out, and he notified the NRC himself." Silence. What does that mean for the reactors? It means the NRC is going to issue a confirmatory action letter. It means both units will be required to shut down until we have a licensed SRO. It means we cannot operate. How long to get a replacement licensed? 18 months, minimum. Doug told me later that the silence on Margaret's end lasted 11 seconds. He counted. Hour 22. The NRC issued a confirmatory action letter to Greystone Energy Corp. Both reactor units were placed on administrative hold, pending resolution of the staffing deficiency. Operations were to cease within 48 hours. The letter was signed by the Region 2 administrator. It referenced 10 CFR 50.54 M by section number, and it named Wes Donovan as the last qualified licensee on staff. Both reactors. $2.7 billion in annual revenue. Shut down. The revenue loss was immediate and staggering. $4.7 million per day. Not projected, not estimated. Actual, because Greystone's 2 units supplied baseload power to a 6-state grid, and every megawatt hour they weren't generating had to be purchased on the emergency spot market at rates that made the CFO, Frank Mercer, look like he'd aged 5 years in a single afternoon. Hour 30, the 703 number called again. This time I answered. It was Garrett Sullivan at Lakeshore Nuclear. "Wes," he said, "I heard. Word travels fast. In this industry, a licensed SRO walking out of a 2-unit plant. That's not word traveling fast. That's a 5-alarm fire. Every operator in the Southeast got the NRC notice 2 hours ago." I imagine they did. So here's what I'm going to say, and I'm only going to say it once. VP of Reactor Operations, your own team. Full authority over licensing, compliance, and operations at both Clarksville units. $27 million signing and retention package. Triple your current salary. You start Monday. I was standing on my back deck. The air smelled like wood smoke. Someone down the road burning leaves. The sun was going down behind the tree line, and the sky was the color of a bruise fading. Meg was inside making dinner. I could hear Ryan's truck pulling into the driveway. He'd just gotten off his shift at the hardware store. "Garrett," I said, "I'll need to talk to my wife. Take tonight, but Wes, this offer doesn't wait long. Not because I'm pressuring you, because 3 other operators are going to call you before breakfast." He was right. By 9 p.m., my phone had 4 missed calls from numbers I recognized. All operators. All facilities that needed what I had. I sat on the deck after dinner. No rye tonight. Just the cold and the quiet, and the sound of Ryan inside, arguing with Emma about whose turn it was to load the dishwasher. Meg came out with her coat on and sat in the chair next to mine. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, "How bad is it? For them?" "Bad. How bad for us?" "We're fine, Meg. Better than fine." She reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were cold from the November air. "Then take the job," she said. "You've given them 19 years. They gave you a conference room and a PowerPoint slide with your salary on it." Back at Greystone, the bleeding had already begun, and Trent Holloway was just starting to understand that he couldn't stop it. The NRC inspectors arrived Wednesday afternoon. They requested documentation of the SRO staffing plan. There was no plan, because I'd filed 3 formal memoranda over 3 years recommending exactly such a plan, and everyone had been received, acknowledged, and ignored. The inspectors found all 3 memos in the regulatory correspondence file. Doug Prescott had kept copies. He's a good man. Thursday morning, Greystone's stock opened down 11%. By noon, it was down 19%. Analysts were on the phone with Margaret Holloway's office asking a question she couldn't answer. When will the reactors restart? Because the answer, 18 months at minimum to license a new SRO, wasn't something Wall Street wanted to hear. The Moody's downgrade came Friday afternoon, investment grade to junk. The debt covenants started triggering like dominoes, and Trent's LinkedIn post was still live. I know because Keith screenshot it and texted it to me without comment. The post, from the previous week, excited to lead the operational transformation at Greystone Energy. Legacy structures don't build the future. Lean leadership does. Hashtag energy innovation. Hashtag next-gen leadership. Hashtag operational excellence. The comments under it were starting to turn. Industry people. People who knew. One comment, from a retired NRC inspector I'd never met, read simply, "You might want to take this down." Trent didn't take it down. He didn't understand yet. He was still sitting in his glass-walled office with his Tag Heuer and his brass buttons, trying to figure out why the phones wouldn't stop ringing and why none of the calls were good news. Meanwhile, I was on my back deck in Oconee County, watching the last light drain out of the sky, with a signed offer letter from Lakeshore Nuclear on the kitchen table and Meg's hand in mine. The reactors were dark. The grid was scrambling, and the only licensed operator who could fix any of it was sitting in a lawn chair, breathing clean air for the first time in 19 years. I started at Lakeshore Nuclear on Monday, Clarksville, Tennessee, 4 hours from Oconee County, but Garrett Sullivan had already arranged temporary housing near the facility while Meg and I figured out the move. The drive up was quiet. Ryan was at school, Emma was at Clemson finishing her junior year, and Meg was staying behind to finish the semester at Oconee Elementary before joining me in January. I drove the Silverado with a duffel bag in the back seat and the offer letter in the glove box. $27 million. Triple my salary. VP of Reactor Operations. Full authority. The Clarksville facility was 2 pressurized water units, similar vintage to Greystone's. I knew the reactor design. I knew the vendor. I knew the fuel cycle. The facility-specific licensing process that takes 18 months for a new candidate. Garrett had it compressed to 5 months for me, with NRC concurrence, because my qualifications file was thicker than most people's careers. I was in the control room by week 2, shadowing their senior staff, learning the plant-specific procedures, while simultaneously restructuring their operations department from the top down. But that's not the part that matters. The part that matters is what happened to Greystone while I was building something new. Day 15 after my resignation, Greystone's emergency power purchasing costs hit $70 million. The 6 state grid operators were buying replacement megawatt hours at emergency spot rates that ran 3 to 4 times the normal baseload price. Every day the reactors stayed dark. The number climbed. Frank Mercer, the CFO, sent a company-wide email asking all departments to implement immediate cost containment measures. He meant layoffs. He just couldn't say it yet. Day 22. Greystone's board of directors held an emergency session. 3 independent directors, Howard Clayton, Richard Ashworth, and Neil Pemberton, demanded a full accounting of how the company had lost its only licensed SRO. Doug Prescott presented the 3 memoranda I'd filed between 2021 and 2024, each one warning that the retirement of Carl Whitaker and Dan Ellison would leave the facility with a single point of failure. Each memo had been received by Margaret Holloway's office. Each had been acknowledged. None had been acted upon. Howard Clayton read the 3rd memo aloud. The room was silent for a long time after he finished. Day 30. The NRC completed its special inspection. The findings were devastating. 4 violations cited, including failure to maintain adequate licensed operator staffing per 10 CFR 50.54 M. Failure to implement corrective actions for a known deficiency, and failure to maintain a succession plan for safety-critical positions. The inspection report was public. Every utility in the country read it. Greystone became a case study in what happens when you let someone who's never stood watch in a control room make decisions about who stands watch in a control room. Day 37. Keith Mercer resigned from Greystone. He called me that evening. "I can't work for people who think a reactor runs itself," he said. He had an offer from Lakeshore within the week. I signed the approval myself. Day 45. 3 more senior operators left. 2 went to competitors. 1 retired early. Greystone's operations department was hollowing out the way a building empties before demolition. The people who knew left first because they understood what was coming. Day 58. Greystone's stock had fallen 43%. 43%. The Moody's downgrade to junk status triggered covenant violations on $1.1 billion in outstanding debt. The company's credit facility was frozen. Margaret Holloway held a press conference in Charlotte, where she used the words temporary operational pause and path to restoration. She did not mention Trent. She did not mention the 3 memoranda. She did not mention my name. But the analysts did. Every downgrade report, every investor note, every trade press article mentioned the same thing. The departure of the facility's sole licensed senior reactor operator, following a compensation dispute initiated by a member of the CEO's family. Trent's LinkedIn post finally came down on day 41. Not because Trent took it down, because Greystone's communications team demanded it. By then, it had been screenshotted, archived, and reposted in every nuclear industry forum and energy sector group chat in the country. Hashtag Operational Excellence, sitting right next to a headline about a $4.7 million per day revenue loss. Someone in an NRC discussion group had added a single comment beneath a repost of the screenshot. "This is what happens when you confuse a slide deck with a control room." Day 60. The cure period expired. Greystone had not licensed a replacement SRO. They hadn't even identified a qualified candidate. The pipeline I'd warned them about for 3 years was exactly as empty as I'd told them it would be. The NRC extended the confirmatory action letter. Both reactors remained dark, and then the contracts started moving. Lakeshore Nuclear's Clarksville facility sat on the same regional grid. We had capacity. We had a spotless regulatory record, one I was now responsible for maintaining. When Greystone's grid contracts came up for emergency rebid, Lakeshore was positioned to absorb them. Garrett Sullivan had been preparing for this since the day he hired me, because Garrett understood something that Trent Holloway never would. In the nuclear industry, reputation is infrastructure. You don't bid on contracts with slide decks. You bid with track records, licensed operators, and relationships with the regulator. Lakeshore absorbed Greystone's grid contracts at a 60% discount. 6 states' worth of baseload power commitments, transferred to a facility that could actually deliver them, operated by a team that included the same man who'd kept those electrons flowing for 19 years. I signed the contract acceptance documents in Garrett's office on a Tuesday morning. He had a framed photo of the Clarksville facility on the wall behind his desk. Both cooling towers at sunrise, steam rising into a pink sky. He shook my hand across the desk. "You know what the best part is?" Garrett said. "The part where we generate the power, or the part where we get paid for it?" He smiled. "The part where you were right about all of it. For 3 years." I didn't have a response to that. Being right doesn't feel like victory when you spent 3 years begging people to listen. Back at Greystone, the end came fast. Margaret Holloway fired Trent in a board meeting on day 67. 3 directors, Clayton, Ashworth, and Pemberton, resigned the same afternoon, citing catastrophic leadership failure in their formal letters. The letters were leaked to the energy trade press within 24 hours. Margaret tried to hire a crisis management firm. The firm declined the engagement after reviewing the NRC inspection report. Trent Holloway was 28 years old and unemployable in the energy sector. Not because of his age, not because of his degree, because every hiring manager in the industry had read the NRC report, seen the LinkedIn post, and understood exactly what had happened. His Wharton MBA was still on his wall. His mother's name was still on the building, but the building was dark. The reactors were cold, and no one in the nuclear world would return his calls. Margaret Holloway resigned as CEO 3 weeks later, under pressure from the remaining board members and a shareholder lawsuit alleging breach of fiduciary duty. The suit cited the 3 unacted-upon memoranda by name. My name was in the filing 11 times. Greystone Energy Corp. Entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy 4 months after I walked out of that conference room. The 2 reactors sat idle, their containment buildings still and gray against the South Carolina sky, waiting for a licensed operator who wasn't coming. The facility was eventually sold to a regional utility consortium for pennies, the kind of acquisition that gets a single paragraph in the trade press and a long silence in the towns that depended on the jobs. I read about the bankruptcy filing on my phone, sitting in the control room at Clarksville during a scheduled maintenance window. The break room coffee was the same institutional swill, different pot, same taste. I set the phone down and went back to work. There was a reactor to run. On a Saturday in late March, I drove home to Oconee County. Meg had finished the semester and most of the packing was done, but the house wasn't listed yet, and I wanted one more weekend before we closed that chapter. The dogwood trees in the front yard were just starting to bud, small white points against the gray branches, like the trees were testing whether it was safe to come back. I pulled the Silverado into the driveway. Ryan's truck was there. He'd driven down from his apartment in Anderson for the weekend. Inside, the kitchen smelled like Meg's chili, the recipe she's made every March since before we were married. Emma was home too, spring break from Clemson, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a statistics textbook fanned out beside it. Ryan was at the counter, assembling cornbread from a box mix, reading the instructions like they were a technical manual. He looked up when I walked in. "Hey, Dad." "Hey." "Mom says we're eating in 10 minutes. You want to wash up or just stand there looking relieved?" I almost smiled. He's got his mother's timing. We ate at the kitchen table, all 4 of us. No television, no phones. Emma talked about her student teaching placement. Ryan talked about the engine rebuild he was doing on a 1987 Ford Ranger he'd bought for $800. Meg listened to all of it with the quiet attention she gives everything. The same patience she'd given 19 years of cold dinners and holidays alone. After dinner, Ryan and Emma went to the living room to argue about a movie. Meg and I sat on the back deck. The air had that early spring softness to it. Cool, but not cold. The smell of damp earth and something green starting to push through. I poured a glass of bullet rye, neat, and set the bottle on the rail. Meg sat in the chair beside me. She didn't say anything for a long time. She didn't need to. 23 years of marriage means the quiet carries everything the words would. Then she said, "You're going to miss this deck." "I am." "We'll get a new one, in Tennessee. It won't be the same." "No, it'll be better. Because you won't be driving to a building at 4 in the morning, wondering if they'll ever hear you." I looked at the tree line going dark. Somewhere down the road, a neighbor was grilling. The smoke drifted through the bare branches and hung in the cooling air. Inside, Ryan laughed at something Emma said. The loud, easy laugh of a kid who doesn't know yet how rare a night like this is. For 19 years, the most important thing in my life operated at 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, behind 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Tonight, the most important thing in my life was sitting at the kitchen table, arguing about a movie and eating leftover cornbread. I took a sip of rye, set the glass down, let the quiet settle. They say you can't put a price on institutional knowledge. Turns out you can. It's $4.7 million a day, and it comes due the moment you stop paying the man who holds it. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.